Welcome, everybody. I'm Katy Wallace, and this is the Natural Allergy and Histamine Relief Talk. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I have a business called Human Nature on Madison's West Side. Before I go any further, I should preface the talk by saying that I provide this information for health education reasons only, and I'm not a medical doctor. So I provide these free webinars in cooperation with the Willie Street Co-op. And the other thing I do for the co-op is provide one-on-one private sessions with members at their store locations once a month and also via Zoom. So if you want to work with me privately, you can sign up for a $45 session. And you do that by reaching out to me directly. You can email me or call me. And I'm not going to give a free lecture next month because I'm starting my body tune-up workshop, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But I am going to be giving a free presentation about the thyroid gland on November 9th at noon. So it'll be another webinar via Zoom just like this one. So I hope you'll tune in for that. So today we're going to talk about what are allergies, what is histamine, and food-based approaches that help with mediating a lot of the symptoms that come along with histamine issues or allergies. I'll talk about a couple of the key supplements that can help reduce symptoms and some of the bigger approaches to figuring out why someone has histamine issues or allergies. So in case you have to leave early, this is the summary slide for the talk right here. The first step when you've got allergies or histamine issues is to identify and remove whatever is causing the problem. The second thing to do would be to reduce the amount of high histamine foods you're eating that are adding to the issue. The next step would be to promote the body's innate ability to detoxify. And then number 4 is kind of a big step, but it basically is trying to do the why work, understanding why the body is struggling with histamines and what can be done to restore the body's immune balance. And part of that is having a healthy gut. When I was writing this talk, I realized that we could talk about these issues for hours. So I hope you'll appreciate that I am brief in providing an overview of some of the key issues so that we can keep to the 1 hour time mark. But understandably, a lot of the things that cause allergies, cause the immune system stress, cause chronic histamine issues are deeper issues that can be very involved and, take more than just a 5-minute talk to discuss. So we'll do our best today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will answer questions at the end. Okay, so an allergy is basically when you have a very strong, damaging, in some cases, immune response by the body to a trigger, right? So the trigger could be, typically we think of it as being like dust or pollen or fur, and the immune system becomes hypersensitive to that thing, and it begins to overreact. Okay, so that's the definition of an allergy. From my perspective as a naturopathic doctor, someone with allergies is usually demonstrating that their immune system is losing tolerance and it's under too much stress. So I see that as a red flag. The immune system needs some nourishment. We need to shore up the immune system from the bottom up, not just think about how do we quelch the immune system's response. Then allergy typically involves a histamine response, and histamine are chemicals that our immune system make when it's irritated. And the histamines are specific chemicals that basically start the process of moving the trigger, the irritant, out of our body. So they'll make us sneeze, they'll give us a scratchy throat, they'll give us mucus. Many different symptoms can come from this histamine production. Cough, runny nose, watery eyes. Okay, you're probably familiar with a lot of these symptoms. Less obvious signs of a histamine issue, or where the body's making more histamines than is healthy, include flushing, migraines, slow or erratic or irregular heartbeat, low blood pressure, rosacea, diarrhea, and mood disorders. So it can have quite a number of different effects that most of us might not think of as being related back to histamine. So basically, when your body comes across a trigger that's aggravating the immune system, your body will send a message to what's called mast cells. These are specific cells in the immune system. They're more concentrated in the gut and the lungs and the skin and the nose and the mouth, as well as in the bloodstream. And they are the cells that release histamines. So there's a trigger. It triggers our mast cells to be more active. The mast cells release a lot of histamine. The histamine, in part, triggers the release of additional chemicals by the immune system that can sometimes lead to a prolonged state of inflammation. And if you've heard any of my other webinars, you know I love to talk about pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is a mouthful, but these are chemicals that perpetuate inflammation chronically in the body. So a chronic state of pain, a chronic state of a skin issue, chronic mood disorder, all of these can go back to these various chemicals triggered by the immune system. And in a healthy person, after these chemicals are released, they'll come back in balance and be reduced again, and the person will go to a normal, healthy, non-inflamed state. But in somebody who's out of balance, sometimes this perpetuation of chemicals just takes on a life of its own, and the person is living with unwanted symptoms or even disease. So here's a visual for you. This person is experiencing hives. Hives or a bad skin rash are an example of where a lot of histamine is being released to the skin. It's promoting blood flow. It's really itchy. A lot of other chemicals are being released by the immune system to try to push out whatever the trigger is. Or here's another common presentation for histamines or allergies, right? The person's got a headache, they've got sinus problems, they're just overall feeling really cruddy, really fatigued because the immune system is mounting an attack to try to drive out whatever is bothering it. So I want to start with taking you through these 4 steps I already outlined that help to address and reduce allergy and histamine issues. The first thing is to identify and remove the trigger. And for most of you, that's probably obvious, but just in case it isn't, you want to maybe go be tested for allergies. For a lot of people with a chronic histamine issue, they might not get very far. Maybe an allergist, a medical allergist, can help them identify some IgE antibodies to a couple of things, but the person still feels like they're still living in this chronically allergic state. And that's because there's a lot of other triggers besides what is typically tested or known as medical allergies. So a trigger could be a food. A trigger could be a pathogen like a bad bacteria in the digestive system. A trigger could be one of the more common allergens we think of, like pollen, that you might get tested for with your medical doctor or an allergist. Or a trigger could be a chemical or a toxin. And sometimes people have multiple triggers happening at once. So I like to think of this analogy I learned from one of my mentors, where if this is the trigger, I mean, it could be a food, it could be a chemical, it could be a pollen, or it could be an underlying infection. And you can do this at home. You can rub the back of your hand. If we kept doing this, I'm assuming you're doing this with me. If we kept doing this and we did this for an hour, we did this for the next 24 hours, what's going to happen to the back of my hand? It's going to be very inflamed and aggravated, and it's going to start to break down. And this is exactly what happens to the immune system over time when there's a constant trigger that's constantly being introduced. So that's why this step is so important. Once you've done that or done that to the best of your ability, then you want to move on to step 2, which is to adjust your diet. Most people have a daily tolerance for histamine. And so let's say you've done as much as you can to identify and remove triggers, but you're still experiencing a lot of symptoms. Then what you need to do is identify any incoming sources of histamine that are being added through diet. And we'll talk about how to do that. Next, you want to promote detoxification. So detoxification is moving out things in the bowel movement, cleansing the blood in the liver and the kidneys and moving it out through urine, sweating, eliminating, okay? And if your detoxification systems aren't up and running well, you're just gonna be back at step 1 constantly because your body's not able to filter out the excess things that are trash that need to be let go of. So healthy detoxification is very important overall. And then step 4 is working more on the gut and the immune system. And for the sake of brevity, I've just kind of lumped in there talking about some of the most common root causes of histamine issues. So we'll go into that on step 4. All right. So let's say you did the best you could to identify triggers. Next, what you need to do is take out the top allergens that are in the diet. These top 6 foods that I have listed here, gluten, sugar, dairy, corn, soy, and peanut, are known to be the most aggravating to the immune system. The main reason that they're aggravating is that at a molecular level, they have a very large peptide structure, which just means protein structure. If you break foods down, they all break down into what's called peptides or little proteins. When we eat those, if we don't have a healthy gut, our immune system is going to interact with our food if we're not digesting it very well. And this is a hallmark of somebody with immune system issues and allergies. So their digestion's not as strong as it should be. And the immune system, you could say, is helping you out with digesting the food. And it is going to target things with a large peptide structure. So these foods I just listed, except for sugar, all have a much larger molecular peptide structure than a lot of the other most common foods. So it's not that I have a personal vendetta against gluten or dairy. Indeed, I agree, they're very delicious, but they have a large molecular peptide structure, and the immune system is going to target that before it targets your kale and your carrots, most likely. And it's going to trigger more histamine release, more pro-inflammatory cytokine release, more immune system chemicals that we're trying to avoid. So that would be step 1. Clean up the diet or clean it up to the best of your ability. Sometimes this seems very overwhelming to people when they first see this list. If that's the case, I'd say pick the low-hanging fruit and go from there. And maybe work with a practitioner like myself or a coach to help you get accustomed to eating healthful foods where you can rotate these foods out for a while and still feel like you're getting all your nourishment needs met and eating a healthy diet. So you want to be eating lots of nutrient-dense foods, good sources of protein, grass-fed bison or beef, fresh seafood will become important when we talk about histamines. Eggs, those are all great sources of protein, lots and lots of healthy vegetables, and maybe instead of eating a lot of grains that are like gluten, moving away from grains and getting carbohydrates from vegetable sources instead, like a sweet potato. And fats are very, very important, often underrated in our culture, since most of us lived through a low fat phase, and some people are still living through that. So fats are very important to emphasize. In fact, fats are the source of the fat-soluble vitamins that help keep the immune system from being so depleted. So vitamins A, vitamins D, E, and K, these are all important vitamins that help the immune system to not become overreactive, to not develop sensitivities and allergies. So I like to use this analogy of my kids. I have 2 girls, and they, when they're unsupervised, like any kids, can be a little bonkers and hyperactive and overreactive. One of them's a teenager now. And That's kind of how an untrained immune system is, or a stressed immune system is, right? It's unable to differentiate like what's really important to get upset about and what's not. And our immune system has this innate ability to modulate. So modulate is a key word. It means that it produces white blood cells within the immune system that keep the other immune cells in check. So it keeps them from overreacting, keeps us from having a cytokine storm, keeps us from developing autoimmune behavior. And that's like what's pictured on the right here, where my mom is one of the mom cells, who, you know, she's around, the kids are very nice and behaved. So there are key things that we can take in our body that help our cells to modulate the immune cells so that they're less reactive and they're not just freaking out about things that, you know, it's time to let go of and to calm down. And that's basically what we're dealing with when we have an immune system that's overreactive and allergic. So more immune modulators come from those high fat, healthy foods. Once you've kind of covered step one, which was identify triggers and identify the key top allergens in the diet and get them out, next, somebody who's really struggling with a lot of histamine issues is going to benefit from avoiding the foods highest in histamine. I'm not going to lie, this is not an easy diet. And if it seems like it would be very difficult for you, you're definitely not alone. What can work for some people is to try the diet very strictly for 1 week. So it's not like you have to follow it for 8 weeks just to see if this is your problem. If you're having a histamine problem, you can follow this diet for 1 week. If it really helps you with your symptoms like brain fog, migraines, fatigue, mood disorders, a horrible rash that won't go away otherwise, then you know you're on to something, and you can keep working with a practitioner like myself to explore the histamine issues. All right, so are you ready? One of the first groups of high histamine foods are fermented foods. So I've got pickles, I've got vinegar, I've got alcoholic beverages pictured here. All of those are fermented things. Any other fermented thing you can think of is going to be high histamine too. So kombucha, sauerkraut. I mean, there's just a ton of high histamine foods that are fermented. So those are not eaten on a high histamine diet. You've got to avoid them completely. So no, you can't have your favorite vinegar or whatever. The second thing is perishable food that's overripe. So sorry for the gross picture, but I always thought it might be better to use a visual that you'll will make an impression than to just be boring. So you know what I'm talking about, okay? Food that's just maybe been sitting on the shelf a little too long. Maybe it doesn't even look bad and you don't even realize it's bad until after you've had it. But food that is, when it's picked, it is very healthy and low histamine. But once it's picked, after that point, fresh produce will accumulate histamine. So for example, some people on a low histamine diet will eat new potatoes, which are the fresh potatoes that have just been harvested like a day or two, versus storage potatoes, which have been set to store, because the longer they're in storage, the more the food accumulates histamines. And this is true for all fresh food. So whether we're talking about grains or beans, those that are storage grains and beans are going to have a much higher histamine load than something that's extremely fresh. The next group of foods that's very high histamine is canned foods. So it pretty much speaks for itself, but we're talking about canned tuna, canned salmon, canned or frozen. I wouldn't say frozen, like frozen broccoli would be fine, but like a TV dinner, you know, something that's been processed and preserved is going to have more histamines than something that's perfectly fresh. So the bottom line is, when you're on a low histamine diet, everything has to be really fresh or frozen when it was very fresh. Then the last group of high histamine foods is foods that have been reheated, and meats and fish and mushrooms seem to be particularly bad for this. So if something's just kept warm or maybe been reheated multiple times, then it is a big candidate to be accumulating more histamines in it, and it can make someone with high histamine symptoms much worse. So in practice, I find when people follow a low histamine diet, they're usually okay eating a food a day or two after they made it, assuming that they stored it right away in the refrigerator or freezer and they're just pulling it out. But you want to think about not eating leftovers that are multiple days old, for example. And certainly there are probably some cases where someone is so sensitive to histamines that they can't even eat leftovers, but that's not my experience. In my experience, most people can tolerate them a day or two afterwards, and that's less of an issue than the groups I just talked about. All right, so those are the 4 groups, but I'd like to go into a little bit more detail. So fish can be very high histamine if it's not extremely fresh or frozen right away. So fish and seafood are sometimes very troublesome for people. They're very health giving. In fact, fish is my favorite food to have people eat. You could live forever on fish. It's just got everything you need for the most part. But for a high histamine person, unless that fish is utmost top quality and was handled properly, it's going to be a problem. So you've got to make sure that you do your research, or you're talking to the guy at the fish counter and they're telling you, yes, this just came in today. This is fresh fish you can have, or yes, this was frozen as soon as it was caught. Those would be the types of fish that would be okay. Anything else might make your issues a lot worse. Fresh meat is kind of the same. You don't want meat that's been sitting around because it'll accumulate histamines. And you don't want meat that's cured. So you don't want bacon and sausage or things that have been cured, because they will accumulate histamines. So things like salami, some lunch meats, if they've gone through a curing process and aren't fresh, would be a problem. Similarly, cheese, kind of ferments and ages, so that's going to accumulate more histamines the older it is. I already talked about the sauerkraut. Kimchi would be another one. Tomatoes, spinach, eggplant, and avocado are actually notorious high histamine foods. And I think we talked about the other things here, except not the soy sauce or the I don't even remember how you say Worcestershire sauce. So anything that goes through a fermentation process like miso would be similar. Tempeh, those could potentially cause issues too. And if I didn't cover these yet, there is another group of foods that encourage histamine release. So if you're somebody whose immune system is a little trigger happy about making histamines, these foods are going to be ones you cut out too. Strawberries, nuts, obviously alcohol that was fermented, chocolate. So chocolate's a big one for people, and citrus fruits, including lemon. So you want to avoid these foods completely in order to get some relief from a chronic histamine issue. So after you follow a low histamine diet for a while, usually people find that they can start to add histamine foods back in. So usually the trajectory would look like 1 week, you're going to be completely strict. You're going to eat only fresh meats and only fresh or frozen vegetables. And good news is all of the healthy oils and fats are low histamine. So that's basically what you want to eat. After that period, if you find that's helpful, then people typically do find adopting this diet for a couple of months to be really helpful, to help resolve a lot of their issues. After that point, you can begin to reintroduce the foods again and test yourself, keeping in mind that all of us daily have like a histamine bucket that we can fill up. So you might be okay eating some strawberries, but that might be it for the high histamine foods for the day for you, right? You won't get away with eating chocolate and strawberries and your cured sausages. So you want to think about histamine issues that way, in terms of just overall lowering the number of high histamine foods that you're eating. There are a couple of supplements that specifically can help lower or at least manage histamine better. Quercetin is one of the most notable, and you can get a 500 milligram extract and take that twice a day or more. I guess I should caveat that sometimes when people have chronic histamine issues, they might have some other interesting genetic things happening, including the ability to break down the quercetin. So for a subset of people, quercetin can affect your sleep at night. So if you try it at this dosage and it doesn't work, then sometimes taking one of these blends works, taking quercetin in a blend like the natural D-Hist or the Histo-X pictured here, or just finding other things that help lower histamine besides the quercetin. One of the other things I really like is butterbur. It's an herb found in this Histo-X formula by Apex Energetics, but it is in the ragweed family. So if you know ragweed is an allergen for you, probably don't want to do butterbur, but otherwise I really like butterbur and I see good results with it because it actually has been shown to lower blood histamine levels. So both of these supplements are very nourishing to the immune system, and they help support a healthy immune response and help manage histamine levels. There's a lot of other herbs and supplements like turmeric, resveratrol, that can be very helpful in kind of the chronic aggravated immune system. But that's kind of a topic for some other webinars I'll point you to in a minute. But I want you to realize these are supplements that help with histamines. Sometimes you need other supplements that are helping with pro-inflammatory cytokine release or detoxification or other pieces of the picture that are happening, because this is a very complex picture overall. So next, you want to think about promoting detoxification. As I said initially, our ability to cleanse our blood and to eliminate waste and things our body doesn't want in it through healthy bowel movements is really fundamental to not developing a lot of allergies or histamine issues. So the detoxification systems have to be fully supported. I just gave a webinar last month on this, so I can refer you back to my website if you want to do a deeper dive on this. But basically, our detox organs, our gut, our kidneys, our liver, all help eliminate allergens and other things that aggravate the immune system. And some of the key things in the diet that help this innate process are having enough cruciferous vegetables in the diet. This helps the first stage of detoxification, known as activation. Also getting adequate protein. So most of the people I coach are not getting adequate protein, and adequate animal protein is usually a lot more superior than other forms. And this can be especially true if someone needs to be following a low histamine diet, because a lot of the vegetarian proteins are legumes or peas, and they're things that have accumulated histamines. So the protein is very important for the second stage of detoxification. And then you need things for elimination. So you need a lot of healthy fats like olive oil. You need to have a lot of beneficial salt, like just a good raw sea salt, as well as good bacteria and a healthy gut biome for detoxification to happen. So these are all areas where somebody needs to be well supported. I just wrote a book on this, so you want to check it out. You can get it at my website here. It's called The Body Tune-Up, and it takes you through 6 weeks of promoting the detoxification system in the body. I'm about to take a group of people through this process. I've been teaching this workshop annually for 15 years. So we do a 10-day focus on the digestive system. Then we focus on the microbiome, or what's called a critter cleanse or parasite cleanse. And then the biggest detoxification organs, the kidneys and the liver, follow. So if you're interested in that, I do have a discounted rate that will expire this coming Monday. So check it out on my website or reach out to me if you're interested in joining that group workshop. But basically, that's a food program that promotes the innate detoxification. And so you can overlay the high histamine food program with the body tune-up to get the detox support and the histamine support. So once you've got those pieces in place, it's time to think about, okay, usually at this point, people are doing better. Their symptoms are better. In some complex cases, they may not be, and that is because there can be an underlying gut or other immune system issue happening. So what is happening in the person's gut is overall very important to address in order for them to get sustainable relief from allergies or other chronic histamine problems. And leaky gut is typically an issue that needs to be addressed. I have a whole nother webinar on leaky gut, so you can check that out on my website. But leaky gut basically is where the single cell layer of the gut lining has been pulled apart, and there's space that shouldn't be there in between the gut cells. This creates a lot of problems, but one of the main problems being that there's no filter anymore between what you're eating and what your immune system is reacting to. So then the immune system is very reactive, and the person can have a lot of histamine or a lot of immune system inflammatory issues. So to heal leaky gut, you need to be on the right diet, and you need to take specific supplements that can help repair the gut lining. This is the talk. You can go to my website. I have all of these talks available for free from just these previously recorded webinars like today. And so if you want to learn more about leaky gut, I'm going to refer you to that in the interest of time. So we've got to deal with leaky gut, and that's generally true across the board, that people with histamine issues need some TLC for their gut and their digestion. What I find is most helpful is doing some tests in order to see where the person needs targeted support. So I specialize in looking at someone's basic blood chemistry, and I look at that in ways very different from a medical doctor, and that I'm really trying to fine tune and optimize someone's health rather than just saying, yeah, you're in or you're out, or you're medically normal or you're not. So you can get a lot of information from basic blood chemistry on how to help someone. I also really like this stool test called GI Map. It gives me a very extensive workup of the gut biome and tells me exactly where we need to support a person to have a healthy gut, which will then translate to a healthy immune system, which will then translate to a resolution of a lot of the allergies and histamine problems. A third area of testing that sometimes can be really helpful is to test someone for food sensitivities. Sometimes when someone has had a weakened immune system for a long time, or maybe they've had leaky gut for a long time, then they've developed a lot of weird sensitivities to things just through exposure. And so sometimes special food sensitivity testing can be really helpful in calming the histamine reactions that are happening. But we're going to talk about the GI map just for another minute. This is a superior test to other stool testing because it is very sensitive. Like for things like H. pylori, it's more sensitive than other tests. They use a PCR DNA-based technology, so they're actually looking for the DNA of different microbiomes in your stool. And I find the findings very relevant and very comprehensive. So I find that it's always worth it to order this for someone. This is just an example. So when you get the results from a GI map stool test, you get 4 pages of information. And this is the third page, which tells us about opportunistic bacteria, which are bacteria that aren't really helpful and can tend to get into an overgrowth state where they can then trigger a lot of problems for someone. So they can trigger inflammation and they can trigger histamine. So I pulled up this page for you to see today that there are a number of different species that this person had flagged as high. And these different species, especially the Pseudomonas, there's 2 Pseudomonas species here, Streptococcus, Citrobacter klebsiella, all of these make histamine. So if a person's already having some symptoms, then they've got all of these opportunistic bacteria in their gut. They're adding to the histamine load for the person. And that is sometimes why a person's struggling so much with histamine issues. So it can be very important to deal with these underlying, these could be subclinical infections. Remember the scratching on the back of the hand? You got some of these strains of bacteria in the gut constantly annoying the immune system. It's going to stress the immune system out where it's releasing a lot more histamine. And you have these organisms adding a lot more histamine to the picture. So no wonder the person's having so many histamine symptoms. So doing a test like this really helps me get to the bottom of it and create a plan for someone to help balance the gut and get the healthy part of the gut biome to outcompete these guys, and resolve a lot of the excess histamine symptoms. Another area that's sometimes a big deal for people with histamine issues is when they have a mold sensitivity. So a lot of people can or have been exposed to a living environment where a lot of mold, toxic mold was present. And a lot of people have the ability to detox the toxins created by mold, but a lot of people don't. And for most of us, it's just a matter of time of mold exposure until it begins to become a problem, because mold makes something called mycotoxins, and the mycotoxins basically interfere with the body's ability to detoxify, and they trigger a lot of histamine release in the mast cells. So the body's just kind of constantly aggravated by this mold that may have happened in the past or may still be happening now. And so sometimes you've got to get to the root of a mold issue as well as all these other things I talked about. So that's why I said in the beginning, it can sometimes be quite complex. For a mold issue, there's something called a mycotox profile, which is a urine test. Again, this is a functional medicine lab, so I order these types of labs for people where we test if there's mycotoxins in your body. A healthy person will not have mycotoxins in their body at high levels. An unhealthy person will have higher levels of mycotoxin because they're not able to eliminate them. So the test really helps us see if this is a part of the histamine and the allergy issues for someone, and something that's just kind of dragging the immune system down chronically and causing a lot of other symptoms. If mold is an issue, then the person has to change their diet, so they're not eating foods high in mycotoxins. They need to do things that help promote detoxification. And often you need to use things like that are called binders. So that might be bentonite or chlorella or charcoal. These are natural health supplements that help adhere to things and pull them out in a bowel movement, and they can be really helpful. And if that wasn't enough different things that could be affecting, I just wanted to give you an idea that hormone balance can often be a big player in histamine issues too. And that's because estrogen, one of the hormones, both men and women have it, will promote more histamine release. So some women I talk to will actually say, they can tell depending on their cycle, their menstrual cycle, that they're worse. Or they could tell as soon as they started going through menopause, all of these histamine related symptoms got worse. And that's because estrogen tends to have an effect at promoting histamine release. As we're going through perimenopause and menopause, our estrogen levels are typically not dropping as quickly as progesterone. And so even though they are dropping, we're still in an estrogen dominant state. And so sometimes you see histamines kind of being tied up in that hormonal piece, and it can be important to test for hormones and do different things to help address hormone balance to help someone. For men too, this can be very important because in both men and women, when we have blood sugar swings, it promotes estrogen dominance. And so sometimes men will have a lot of issues with estrogen dominance as well, perhaps as they're approaching andropause, or if they just have significant blood sugar swings that are shifting the metabolization from testosterone to estrogen. All right, so I think we covered everything. We talked about different ways to identify and remove triggers. So that could start with a trip to the allergist, but in most cases needs to go further beyond that to identify those top 6 high allergen foods that I talked about. I recommend getting those out of the diet to help calm the immune reaction to the daily diet. Then the next step would be to follow a low histamine diet. And again, it's so difficult to follow this diet. People definitely do it, but it's not a cakewalk. And I recommend doing it for at least a week. Within that week, you'll know if it's helpful or not if you followed it properly. And if you find it's helpful, then it's something you can continue with longer while you're working on these next steps, which will hopefully further resolve the issue so that you don't have to be on the histamine diet forever. So if you can do things that promote detoxification, and there's many ways to do that. I highlighted, the approach I outlined in my book, The Body Tune-Up, as one way to do that. And then the last step would be trying to make sure that the gut and the immune system are fully supported. Many times doing different testing to figure out what the root cause of the histamine issues is critical here. Maybe for other people, it might just be making sure you've got the nutrients that your immune system needs, maybe making sure you're taking vitamin A and D and K, getting your levels checked, making sure that they're optimal. And changing some things in your lifestyle to promote more immune system support, like less stress, more rest, things like that. So thank you so much. If anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat. I'd be happy to, I guess, expand upon some of the things I talked about. But otherwise, thanks for joining me. And I hope you will join me in November when I talk about thyroid health.